First contact with terror. The research vessel Celestial Seeker emerged from hyperspace at the edge of what the Galactic Database classified as System X-2547, a moderate-risk solar system. Chief Xenobiologist Zaxna's four eyes widened in horror as the preliminary scans flooded her workstation's displays. She triple-checked the readings, her scaled hands trembling over the holographic controls. "Captain Verlox," she called out, her voice quavering. "I believe our database classification requires immediate updating. This isn't a moderate-risk system. The third planet. It's a death world." Captain Verlox slithered from his command pod, his serpentine body coiling anxiously as he examined the data. The planet's characteristics scrolled before them. Extreme temperature variations, volatile atmospheric conditions, constant tectonic activity, and devastating storms that could level entire regions. "By the ancestral stars," he whispered. "How did this get classified as moderate risk? The gravity alone would crush most species." "Sir," the sensor operator interrupted, "we're detecting artificial satellites and electromagnetic signatures consistent with technological civilization." Silence fell over the bridge. A technological civilization on a death world. Impossible. Yet there it was. As they entered orbit, the evidence became undeniable. Cities sprawled across the planet's surface, from frozen tundras to scorching deserts. Transportation networks crisscrossed continents. Industrial centers buzzed with activity. "They call themselves humans," Zaxna reported, processing the intercepted communications, "and they consider this environment normal." The crew watched in stunned disbelief as their monitors showed humans going about their daily lives. Children played in parks under a radiation-spewing sun. Adults jogged for recreation, voluntarily subjecting themselves to cardiovascular stress. Workers constructed buildings that reached impossibly high into the toxic atmosphere. "Look at this," Zaxna called out, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. "They're deliberately exposing themselves to temperature extremes for entertainment." The monitor showed humans swimming in frozen lakes and lounging in rooms filled with scalding steam. "Captain," she continued, "request permission to establish a research post. These creatures, they defy everything we know about biological limitations." Verlox considered the request carefully. "Granted, but maintained strict quarantine protocols. Whatever allowed these beings to evolve in such conditions might be lethal to us." Over the next several days, Zaxna's team documented countless examples of human resilience. They watched in horror as humans routinely survived conditions that would kill most galactic species instantly. A human child fell from a considerable height, got up laughing, and continued playing. An elderly human walked through freezing rain without environmental protection. A group of humans deliberately gathered to watch storm clouds that contained enough electrical energy to power a small city. "Their bone density is remarkable," Zaxna noted in her log. "Their ability to repair damage is unprecedented. But most shocking is their psychological resilience. They don't just survive here. They thrive. They've turned survival into an art form." The research team observed humans participating in activities they called sports, deliberately subjecting themselves to physical stress and impact. They documented humans living in areas with active volcanoes, in deserts hot enough to cook proteins, and in regions where the air was so thin it barely qualified as atmosphere. Most fascinating, Zaxna recorded, is their response to danger. Where any rational species would retreat from threat, humans display a tendency to move toward it. They call it curiosity and adventure-seeking. I believe we're observing an entirely new category of intelligent life. As the first week of observation concluded, Captain Verlox called an emergency meeting. "The Galactic Council needs to know about this," he declared. "These humans, they're not just surviving on a death world. They're mastering it." Zaxna nodded in agreement, but her attention was fixed on a new display showing humans diving into something called an ocean, a massive body of water covering most of their planet, filled with predators and crushing pressures. "Captain," she said, not looking away from the screen, "I don't think we're dealing with normal inhabitants of a death world. I think we're looking at something far more significant." She turned to face the captain, all four eyes bright with excitement. "We may be witnessing the evolution of a species that could reshape our understanding of life itself." The implications were staggering. If humans could not only survive but prosper in conditions that would kill most species, what else were they capable of? As the celestial seeker continued its orbit, Zaxna couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just observing an interesting species. They were witnessing the emergence of a force that would change the galaxy forever. The study begins. After 2 weeks of orbital observation, the Celestial Seekers research team had compiled enough data to begin their detailed study of human physiology and behavior. Zaxna sat in her laboratory, surrounded by holographic displays showing various human activities across different regions of Earth. "Begin research log, day 15, she dictated. "The more we observe humans, the more impossible they seem. Today we witnessed something they call marathon running. Groups of humans voluntarily running 42.2 kilometers for recreation. Not survival, not transportation, recreation." Her assistant, bioanalyst Krelter, projected a new series of readings. "Chief, you need to see this. We've been monitoring their sleep patterns. The data showed humans spending roughly a third of their day completely unconscious. They willingly enter a state of prolonged vulnerability." Zaxna noted, her scales rippling with amazement. On a planet with active predators, violent weather, and constant tectonic activity, they deliberately become unconscious for hours at a time. The implications for their threat assessment capabilities are staggering. The ship's intercom crackled. "Chief Cynobiologist to the bridge." Immediately, on the bridge, Captain Verlock's expression was grim. The main view screen showed a massive storm system developing over a populated coastal region. "They're calling it a hurricane," he explained. "Surely they'll evacuate the entire area." But the humans didn't evacuate, not entirely. While some moved inland, others stayed behind, securing structures and preparing emergency supplies. Most shocking were the humans who deliberately headed toward the storm. "What are they doing?" Verlox demanded. "They call themselves emergency responders and storm chasers," Zaxna explained, checking the intercepted communications. "Some stay to help others evacuate. Some study the storm itself. They're not just surviving their environment, Captain. They're challenging it." Over the next few days, the research team documented the hurricane's impact and the human response. Where other species would see only destruction, humans displayed an almost incomprehensible ability to adapt and rebuild. "Their young require extensive care," Krelter noted during another research session. "Nearly 2 decades of protection and education before reaching physical maturity. Yet this vulnerability seems to have driven their technological advancement rather than hindering it." Zaxna nodded, reviewing footage of human children in various environments. "They've turned their biological weaknesses into technological strengths. No natural armor. They build it. No claws. They forge better ones. No wings. They create machines that fly faster than any natural creature." The research team's attention shifted to human dietary habits, which proved equally baffling. "They can digest an extraordinary range of substances," Zaxna recorded. "Not only that, they deliberately consume chemicals that their bodies flag as toxins: capsaicin, ethanol, caffeine. They've turned poison resistance into a cultural touchstone." Perhaps most perplexing was human medical science. The team watched in horror as humans deliberately cut open other humans, removed or repaired organs, and sealed them back up, with the patients surviving and recovering. Their medical techniques would be classified as torture in most civilized systems, Krelter observed. Yet they've mastered it to extend their lives far beyond their natural span. The breakthrough in understanding came from an unexpected source: human entertainment. The research team had been monitoring their media broadcasts, trying to understand human psychology. Captain Zach Snare reported during the evening briefing, "I believe I've identified a crucial pattern. Their entertainment consistently features scenarios of overcoming impossible odds. Their stories celebrate not just survival, but victory over hostile conditions." She projected a series of human fiction narratives. They imagine worlds even more dangerous than their own. They create stories about surviving apocalyptic events, battling monsters, colonizing hostile planets. This isn't just entertainment. It's psychological preparation. They're constantly training themselves to face worse conditions than they already endure. Captain Verlox absorbed this information with growing concern. "Are you suggesting they're actively preparing for conditions even more extreme than their homeworld?" "More than that, Captain. I believe they're eager for it. Look at their space exploration efforts. They're already planning colonies on nearby planets with even harsher conditions than Earth. They're not trying to find a more hospitable environment. They're challenging themselves to survive in worse ones." The implication sent a shiver through the entire bridge crew. A species that treated survival as a sport, that deliberately sought out greater challenges, that turned their biological limitations into technological advantages. What would they do when they discovered the wider galaxy? "There's something else," Zaxna added, her voice quiet but intense. "We've detected numerous examples of humans surviving conditions our medical models claim are fatal. They have a saying, 'Where there's a will, there's a way.' I'm beginning to think their greatest adaptation isn't physical at all. It's their sheer, unrelenting determination to survive." As if to emphasize her point, the monitors showed humans surfing on massive waves, climbing sheer cliff faces, and diving into underwater caves, all activities that seemed to deliberately court death, yet somehow resulted in triumph more often than tragedy. "Continue monitoring," Captain Verlox ordered. "But update the ship's classification protocols. This isn't just a DEATHWORLD study anymore. This is a first contact scenario with a potential Class A survival species, and may the ancestral stars help us all if they ever decide to leave their planet in numbers." Natural disasters and human response. The celestial seeker's sensors detected the earthquake before the humans did, a massive tectonic shift preparing to unleash devastating force near a heavily populated coastal region. The alien research team watched in horrified fascination as their instruments predicted catastrophic damage. "Surely now they'll abandon the area," Captain Verlox muttered, his scales shifting nervously as he monitored the situation. Even they must have limits. But Zaxna had learned to expect the unexpected from humans. "No, Captain. Watch." The earthquake struck with terrifying force. Buildings swayed, roads cracked, and the ocean itself seemed to recoil before surging forward in massive waves. But instead of fleeing in panic, humans organized with shocking efficiency. "Remarkable," Zaxna dictated into her research log. "Their disaster response appears to be pre-planned and coordinated. They've constructed their dwellings to flex rather than shatter. They've built warning systems, escape routes, and emergency protocols into their very infrastructure." The research team observed as humans rushed toward collapsed structures, digging through rubble with their bare hands to save trapped survivors. Emergency workers moved with practiced precision, setting up field hospitals and rescue operations within hours. Their communication networks remained functional despite the destruction. Krelter noted with amazement, "They built redundancy into everything. It's as if they expect disaster as a natural part of existence." "Because they do," Zaxna replied, her 4 eyes fixed on the monitors. "Look at their historical records. They've faced these conditions for millennia. Each disaster teaches them. They adapt, improve, prepare for the next one." The days following the earthquake provided even more insights into human resilience. The research team watched as humans from unaffected regions poured into the disaster zone, bringing supplies, equipment, and aid. They worked tirelessly, using everything from sophisticated machinery to simple hand tools. "They call it humanitarian aid," Zaxna explained during the evening briefing. The concept is fascinating. They've developed a cultural imperative to help others survive. They don't just endure their death world. They actively work to protect others from it. But why? Captain Verlox demanded. Why expend resources helping weaker members? Natural selection should favor letting them perish. That's just it, Captain. They've transcended simple natural selection. They've turned mutual survival into a cornerstone of their civilization. They don't just help the strong survive. They help everyone survive. The monitors showed humans setting up temporary shelters, distributing food and water, and beginning reconstruction efforts. Children were already returning to schools in reinforced buildings, while engineers assessed and repaired damage to critical infrastructure. "Look at this," Krell called out, highlighting a particular scene. "They're already improving the buildings they're reconstructing, making them stronger, more resistant to future quakes. They learn from every disaster," Zaxna noted. "Each catastrophe makes them more resilient, more prepared. But it's not just physical preparation. Their psychological adaptation is extraordinary." The research team had intercepted thousands of human communications during the crisis. Instead of despair, they found determination. Instead of surrender, they saw unity. Humans shared stories of survival, celebrated rescues, and immediately began planning for recovery. "They have a saying," Zaxna told the captain. "What doesn't kill us makes us stronger." At first, I thought it was just bravado. Now I realize it's their fundamental philosophy. They don't just survive challenges, they grow stronger because of them. As if to prove her point, the monitor showed humans already returning to their daily routines in the affected area. Markets reopened, transportation resumed, and life continued with remarkable normalcy, even as aftershocks continued to shake the region. "Captain," Zaxna said, her voice serious, "I believe we need to revise our understanding of what constitutes a deadly environment. These humans, they don't just adapt to survive their environment. They adapt their environment to ensure their survival." The research team watched as humans deployed new seismic monitoring equipment, upgraded building codes, and improved their emergency response systems. They weren't just recovering. They were preparing, improving, evolving. "There's something else," Krell added, reviewing the data. "During the crisis, we recorded numerous instances of humans rushing into dangerous situations to save others, not just their own offspring, but complete strangers. They call it heroism." "Heroism," Zaxna repeated, testing the word. "They turned surviving danger into a virtue. They celebrate those who risk death to save others. They've made confronting their DEATHWORLD's hazards into a mark of honor." Captain Verlox coiled thoughtfully in his command pod. "Are you suggesting that their hostile environment has actually made them stronger as a species?" "More than that, Captain. I believe it's made them something entirely new. They don't just survive here. They've turned survival itself into an art form, a science, and a cultural cornerstone." As if to emphasize her point, the monitors showed teams of humans already planning improved tsunami warning systems, while others documented the earthquake's effects to better prepare for future events. "They're not victims of their death world," Zaxna concluded. "They're its masters, and they're getting better at it every day." The ultimate test. The warning came from Celestial Seeker's long-range sensors, a massive solar flare, far beyond anything in their historical records, was heading directly toward Earth. The ship's crew watched in horror as their calculations predicted devastating consequences. The radiation alone would sterilize most civilized worlds. Krell reported, his appendages trembling as he analyzed the data. "And the electromagnetic pulse. It will destroy their technology. Their entire civilization could collapse." Zaxna stood before the command console, all four eyes fixed on the approaching disaster. "Have they detected it yet?" "Yes," Captain Verlox confirmed. "Their primitive solar monitoring stations just identified the threat. By our calculations, they have approximately 72 Earth hours before impact." The research team expected panic. They expected chaos. What they witnessed instead defied all their predictions. Within hours of detecting the threat, human governments worldwide had initiated emergency protocols. Scientists and engineers mobilized on an unprecedented scale. Military forces deployed to protect critical infrastructure. But most surprisingly, the humans appeared to have planned for even this scenario. They're implementing something called the Solar Shield Protocol, Zaxne reported, scanning through intercepted communications. It's a contingency plan they developed decades ago, despite having no immediate need for it. They literally planned for an apocalypse during peacetime. The next 72 hours demonstrated human cooperation and ingenuity on a scale that left the alien observers speechless. Power grids were systematically shut down and protected. Critical systems were hardened against the impending electromagnetic pulse. Satellites were repositioned to minimize damage. "Look at this," Krell called out. "They're converting underground structures, what they call subway systems, into emergency shelters. They're not just trying to survive themselves. They're protecting their infrastructure to rebuild afterward." The monitors showed humans working around the clock, converting facilities, distributing supplies, and preparing protective measures. But what truly amazed the observers was the absence of widespread panic. There was fear, yes, but it seemed to drive humans to action rather than paralysis. "They're treating it like a challenge," Zaxna noted in her log. "Not just an existential threat, but a problem to be solved. They've even got their entertainment networks broadcasting survival instructions, mixed with what they call morale-boosting content." As the solar flare approached, humanity's response continued to evolve. Universities worldwide had transformed into emergency research centers. Competing corporations freely shared proprietary technology. Nations that were historical enemies pooled resources and expertise. "Captain," Zaxne reported, her voice tight with excitement, "they're attempting something unprecedented. They're trying to create a makeshift magnetosphere enhancement using their planet's existing power grid." The concept was audacious. By coordinating power stations worldwide and using the planet's natural magnetic field, humans planned to create an artificial shield against the worst of the solar radiation. The chances of success seemed minimal. "Even if it fails," Krell observed, "the level of cooperation required to attempt it is remarkable. They've unified their entire species in less than 3 days." The flare hit with devastating force. The celestial seeker's sensors registered levels of radiation that should have spelled the end of human civilization. The ship's crew watched in tense silence as Earth's night side blazed with aurora displays visible even in daylight. But the humans' desperate plan worked, partially. While their makeshift shield couldn't completely protect them, it reduced the impact significantly. Their power grids were damaged but not destroyed. Their communications were disrupted but not eliminated. Their civilization was wounded but very much alive. What happened next amazed the observers even more than the initial response. Humans emerged from their shelters and immediately began rebuilding. They had pre-positioned resources, planned recovery operations, and prepared for multiple scenarios. They treated their partial success not as a lucky survival, but as a learning opportunity. "They're already analyzing the data," Zaxne reported, incredulous. "They're not just recovering. They're planning improvements for next time. They're treating a near-extinction event as a practice run." Captain Verloc slithered closer to the main view screen, watching as humans methodically restored their systems and repaired damage. "They're not just surviving their death world anymore," he said slowly. "They're becoming something more, something new." "Yes," Zaxna agreed. "They've turned their entire planet into a training ground. Every disaster, every challenge, every near-extinction event just makes them stronger, more prepared, more determined." The research team continued monitoring as humanity recovered with remarkable speed. Within weeks, most systems were restored, and improvements were already being implemented. They hadn't just survived, they had adapted, evolved, and grown stronger. "Update the mission classification," Captain Verlox ordered. This isn't a DEATHWORLD study anymore. This is a first contact scenario with an emerging Class A civilization. And they're not just surviving their world, they're mastering it. As the Celestial Seeker's crew watched humans rebuild, improve, and prepare for future challenges, they realized they weren't just observing a species that could survive on a death world. They were watching the birth of a species that could survive anywhere, face any challenge, overcome any obstacle. The implications were both thrilling and terrifying. Reclassification. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as Zaxna concluded her presentation. The massive holographic display above the chamber showed scenes from Earth, humans rebuilding after the solar flare, children playing in what should be lethal gravity, athletes performing in conditions that would kill most species instantly. So, spoke High Counselor Vexthal, their crystalline form shimmering with concerned energy. You're telling us that this species not only survives on a death world, but actively seeks out greater challenges. Yes, High Counselor, Zaxna responded, her scales slightly rippling with excitement. But that's not the most remarkable part. They've turned survival itself into an art form. What kills other species makes them innovate. What threatens them makes them cooperate. What should destroy them makes them stronger. The council chamber erupted in murmurs. Representatives from 1,000 worlds discussed the implications. A species that treated survival as a sport, that deliberately sought out danger, that turned limitations into advantages. The possibilities were as terrifying as they were fascinating. Show them the physical adaptation data, Captain Verlox suggested from his position beside her. Zaxna nodded, changing the holographic display. Humans can survive temperature ranges that would kill most species. They can recover from injuries that our medical science considers fatal. They can adapt to almost any environment within weeks, but their physical capabilities aren't what make them unique. She displayed scenes from the solar flare crisis. This is their true power. When faced with extinction-level threats, they don't just survive. They innovate. They cooperate. They triumph. And then they prepare for worse. Worse? Asked Counselor Meyerkey of the gas giant colonies. What could be worse than their current environment? That's exactly what they keep asking themselves, Zaxna explained. They create entertainment about surviving worse conditions. They train for disasters that haven't happened yet. They prepare for threats they haven't even encountered. They call it science fiction, but we've discovered it's really survival preparation disguised as entertainment. The display showed humans exploring their solar system, establishing colonies in even more hostile environments than Earth. They're not trying to escape their death world, Zaxna continued. They're using it as a training ground for even greater challenges. This is unprecedented, declared High Counselor Vexthal. Never in our history have we encountered a species that actively seeks out hostile conditions for, what did you call it? They call it adventure, Zaxna replied. They have a saying, because it's there. They climb mountains not because they need to, but because the mountains exist. They dive into their oxygen-toxic oceans not for resources, but for discovery. They launch themselves into space not just for expansion, but for the sheer challenge of it. The council chamber grew quiet as the implications sank in. A species that treated lethal conditions as a challenge rather than a threat. A civilization that had turned survival into a cornerstone of their culture. There's more, Zaxna added, her voice growing serious. Their response to the solar flare crisis revealed something crucial. When faced with species-wide threats, they don't fragment, they unite. Their nations set aside differences. Their corporations share resources. Their scientists freely exchange information. They become, effectively, a single organism focused on survival. And you believe they're ready for contact? Asked Counselor Meyerkey. Ready? Zaxna displayed final footage. Humans already planning improved solar defense systems, establishing Mars colonies, reaching further into space. They've been ready. They've been preparing for it without even knowing it. Every challenge their DEATHWORLD presence is just practice for them. Every survival situation is just training. High Counselor Vex Thal's crystalline form pulsed with decision. The Council will now vote on the reclassification of planet Earth and the status of humanity. The vote was swift and unanimous. Earth would no longer be classified as a death world. It would be recognized as something new, a crucible world, a planet that forged its inhabitants into something stronger, more resilient, more adaptable than anyone had thought possible. There's one final thing, Zaxna added as the Council prepared to adjourn. During our observation, we noticed humans have their own classification for their world. They don't call it a death world. They call it home. And they're not just surviving there, they're thriving. Perhaps it's time we stopped wondering how they survive on their world and start wondering what they'll do when they leave it. The Council chamber erupted in discussion again, but Zaxna's attention was drawn to the final image on the display, a human child looking up at the stars, not with fear of their deadly radiation, but with wonder and anticipation. Classification update accepted, announced High Counselor Vex Thal. Earth is now designated as a Class A crucible world, and humanity. They paused, their crystalline form flickering with what might have been anxiety. Humanity is classified as an emerging universal adaptation species. May we be ready when they finally join us among the stars. As the Council adjourned, Zaxna made one final entry in her research log. We came to study how humans survive on a death world. We learned instead that there's no such thing as a death world. There are only worlds waiting for the right species to master them. And humanity. They're not survivors. They're conquerors, not through force, but through sheer, unstoppable determination to treat every obstacle as a challenge, every threat as an opportunity, and every limitation as a temporary inconvenience. The galaxy isn't ready for them. But then again, maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needs.